When Wolves posted this tweet celebrating their esports team winning a tournament, that was the first I heard of the fact that they have an esports team. And then I went on Reddit, and apparently I'm living in a weird multiverse because there are a bunch of folks who have heard about Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club through their esports team. Today we're going to find out why do teams invest in esports, how do you go from winning on the pitch to winning in the digital world, and what can traditional sports learn from esports. This is the iTest FC. Welcome to season 2 of the iTest FC. As usual, I'm your host Arjun. I'm here with a very special guest today, someone who is working in the gaming industry, someone who has owned an esports team in the past, Signify, and who's a very close friend of mine. Nishant, welcome to the iTest FC.
Thanks, dude. Very happy to be here. I'm very excited to have this conversation because there's a lot of parallels we can draw from football and games and esports, and there's a lot to talk about. So I'm happy to be here.
The first question I would want to ask is why? Why would a team invest in esports?
Yeah, that's a short question, but a loaded question because it actually takes me back to an example. It takes me back to an interview I had with someone who was a publishing director for a very big game franchise, a game that perhaps all of us at some point have played on the PlayStation 5, 4, or whatever was relevant back then. I remember asking him about esports, and I wanted to get, a company that's endemic to gaming, what's their view on esports? And he made this very important statement that stuck with me, which is for him, esports was a marketing expense. That at the end of the day was a very small number on his marketing budget. And he said, is esports going to be the know all end all of entertainment and how people engage with games? I don't know. But for me, it's a bet for the future that's already paying off. And I think since then, we've grown from esports being a bet that people not only in the gaming industry are sort of taking a piece of the action from, it's also traditional sports. Coming down to why this would perhaps be the case, it's precisely a multitude of reasons, among which I would say it's a chance to reach an audience that may or may not already be familiar with what you're doing, may or may not already be familiar with the community or the team you're building. And it's meeting them where they are. It's meeting them where they're spending a lot of time. They're highly engaged. And it's just another means to an end to have a meaningful conversation with them. For any team or any community at large to stay relevant, to bring more and more people as part of people that they can reach and engage with, and then monetize on the long tail, they need different vehicles and different methods to reach them. Gaming, and then therefore esports via gaming, is just another vehicle for this community or this club or this franchise to reach an audience that they weren't traditionally reaching previously. The whole idea behind being a bit experimental like that is, you're reaching a certain cohort of people that may not play football or that may not watch every Premier League game, but at the same time they are bet for the future. You can still build a connection with this particular audience and then think about the different ways you want them to engage with your club. It's there are these words and there are these areas where people spend a lot of time, a lot of money, where people are highly engaged. It's let's find a meaningful way to also give them another vehicle of another way of engaging with our team or our club.
So, you describe esports as a financial tool for a lot of these football clubs, but do you expect fan base to improve or increase for a football team directly because of esports? Because I imagine that a lot of these football clubs, when we started watching because you identify with the club, you like how they play, you like players, something that actually happens on the pitch, right? Not their esports team doing well and therefore I like the team. It's a very different world to try to understand.
Yeah. In this case, I would say think of esports as a means to an end, right? The financial benefit might not be there from the get go. It's not as if Wolves performs well in an esports tournament and now we've gotten a certain number of fans as a result of this, and now they're going to watch a football game or they're going to spend money on a Wolves kit. It's more building places and building communities where people want to spend time, money, resources, attention, And in order to do that, you need to meet people where they are. I think Wolves' entire objective of this is, even if the conversion isn't direct, even if the conversion isn't immediate, even if it's not as simple as I saw this team, I like them play, and now I'm a fan. It's let's make them a part of our world. Let's make them part of the community. Let's show them what Wolves stands for. And then there's so many different ways we can engage with them. And that could be selling something in a digital space, such as a Wolves kit on Roblox. There could be getting eventually these guys to watch a football game in person and spending money on an actual ticket. It could just be getting these people to talk about Wolves and then share Wolves' content on Instagram. There's a lot of upside for someone like Wolves to reach an audience that is not already familiar with what the team does or what the franchise does.
Mhm.
Communicate in a way that's authentic to them. That's uh, that's in a language that they understand, and then think about the many different ways you can take this journey with them beyond that.
Do you then perceive the football club as more innovative?
Yeah. And I think that core of innovation on how to engage with new audiences, how to connect with new audiences, and giving them a platform is almost endemic to any sports franchise or to any sport to begin with. It's a similar reason why we see the Indian cricket team taking pictures with Manchester United, right? For example, like what's the parallel there? The parallel there is via each other's channels, you're reaching an audience that was not already privy to your sport or was not already privy to your team. But now you've had this crossover event, and now suddenly a lot of people that perhaps watch cricket in some corner of some village in India are now suddenly going to be slightly more familiar with Diogo Dalo or with
Right.
Onana.
Sure.
Simultaneously, there's a lot of people that born and bred Mancunians who perhaps never picked up a cricket bat before, but now might watch the next Test game. It's all about finding commonalities. It's all about finding overlap. It's all about finding new ways. And through social media and through all these different engagements, you have these different vehicles where you can reach new audiences, which is essentially what gaming and esports and everything is to traditional sports teams. It's just another way of reaching a new audience and speaking to them in a language that they understand, in the hopes that they are now part of this community and they're now more familiar with what you did before, what you do now, as compared to the more familiar than they were before. There's examples from back in the day as well that you might consider innovative. This is not the first time Wolves is in Call of Duty. That's one that's happening now. But there was a time when PSG used to partner up with teams in China that play Dota 2. Once again, the idea there is, there's a whole cohort or there's a whole batch of boys between a certain age group in China that don't necessarily watch football, but they spend a lot of time playing Dota. If we have to grow the PSG brand, whether it's a fashion label that we're trying to grow or we're trying to get them to watch more Champions League games that we can then monetize via TV rights, etc. The idea is to reach these people in a way and in a very direct fashion that's authentic to them, and that happened to be this one particular game called Dota 2. And it was a very successful partnership that went on for 3 years. They went on to win multiple titles. It was a small part of PHG's marketing budget to sponsor this Dota 2 team in China. And what they may have received on the tail end of that was this in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, new fans that would never have watched football but are now familiar with PSG.
Yeah. That's just incredible to even think about, right? And we speak about esports teams, and as an owner of an esports team, how is it like to build a team? Like, how do you go about it? How do you go from idea to actually executing and playing in tournaments?
I'd say it's not too unfamiliar from traditional sports, from building out a sports club or building out a team that plays football, yeah, at either the semi-professional or even professional level. A lot of the core ingredients are the same. What you need at the end of the day is a bunch of good players that play well together, that are able to compete, and the system around that to support them. And this could include anything from having the right support staff in place, from coaches, analysts, athletes, player managers, some of those guys to help these guys on their journey. Because at the end of the day, these are a group of 5 to 10 players that are competing for millions of dollars. So you need to make sure they have the infrastructure it takes to succeed, and at the same time, there's the team building element of it, which is not too different from building a football team either, which is you need a set of players that look at the game in a similar way, willing to play around each other, have the right talent and the right attitude to fit a certain style of play such that it gives them an edge over other teams. Practically speaking, how this goes is you usually choose the kind of team you want to build, identify the right talent that would fit that team, and then find a way to bring them on board, just like you would for any football club.
All right. First of all, I'm going to come across as very naive in this whole topic because what do you mean support system? Like, I just assumed you have five people playing a game. It's five people, the person who owns the team, and a couple more people who sort out like legal contracts, logistics. Like, what
Yeah,
do you mean? Like, you need, like, how much is your upfront investment to start an esports team?
dude, that's a so it depends on what level you're trying to compete, right? If you're trying to compete for millions of dollars, which sometimes is the prize pool at the end of some of these tournaments, you got to put in millions of dollars worth of investment. Uh, because at that level, having a slightly better coach or having slightly more data on a team that you're going to come up against or having slightly better talent is going to give you a massive edge. That said, if you're just trying to build organically and you want to build a team that competes locally and then you're going to monetize them locally and then slowly grow on from there, your investment can be drastically small in comparison. So it really depends on what scale you're trying to compete. But to come back to your first point is at the end of the day, if you are competing at the highest level, you're competing with the top 1% of all players that play a certain game, that hundreds of thousands of people are going to watch. uh, it's not too different. You will take everything that you can that might give you a competitive edge, and that does mean you need to build the system around these players to support them to compete at that level. Frankly, it's what the players will look at before they choose to sign with your team as well, because some of the guys at the highest level they'll have offers from multiple teams, right? One of the things they're going to look at is, okay, if I'm taking the call to move to this team, will I be able to compete for the biggest prize? And is this a team that's also going to support me and back me as much as I'm going to play for them? It can be quite significant if you're trying to bring talent like that on board.
You know what struck me a lot is if the question was, how do you go about building a traditional football club? Your answer's probably verbatim the same. There are not too many differences, right? What I find a bit curious, or what I'm a bit curious about here is you said, yeah, the upper echelons of the sport, you invest a lot to get that extra 1%. But in traditional football, if you get relegated, you have parachute payments to ensure you don't go under, right? You ensure you are able to sustain as a football club even by investing and going all in the Premier League. But you do also see a lot of traditional football teams going bankrupt because they're not run sustainably. But I don't expect esports to be so mature as an industry. What's the success rate in running an esports team?
I'd say you'd be surprised by how mature it's gotten over the last 10 years. Because there is also this distinction between leagues that are organized, run, and supported by the publishers of the games themselves versus you're just free competing in an esport or a game that's open for anyone to enter. In the sort of organized leagues, the ones that are supported and run by the publishers themselves, a sort of relegation system like that might even exist, and those parachute payments and those minimum payments do also exist. And usually that's where investors will be slightly more easy entering as compared to the completely unorganized sector where the barrier to entry is much low, where all you need is like five people behind a computer or PlayStation and already you're
Yeah.
competing.
Yeah.
With those, the success rate obviously is lower because the barrier to entry is also lower. So I will
That's
say there's no definite answer to your question on what the success rate is, but it can be mitigated if you do things properly, if you set the team up properly, and you apply for a proper franchise license and everything, and then compete in the organized leagues is much higher versus you very organically trying to build a team and trying to take on the world. It can be done in a much more sort of steadfast, shortcut way, but then the success rate obviously is not quite.
Yeah, it's based on how professionally you build up effectively, right? And that takes me to my next question. How do you build your squad? Because squad building itself is a whole area that fans in general don't pay too much attention to. They're more interested in, yeah, who's the shiny new toy? What's the next biggest signing? in a football club, right? But when you're an owner, you think about squad building. So,
Mhm.
how did you go about it? Is it still quite similar to traditional football?
Very similar to the sort of soft answer you just gave as well, is that it's a mix of talent and it's a mix of sometimes you might have the star players that with them bring a lot of attention that you can monetize versus building a team that fits the kind of game that you want to play. It's similar. And I had certain principles that I used to employ back in the day. I would always like a mix of experience and young talent, much like a football club. I would always look for good synergy between the captain of the team. I think that's a slight difference is that esports team is typically much smaller. Football team is 11 players plus at minimum. You know, you're talking about building a squad of 24 players sometimes. In esports, you're maybe 5 or 7 or 10 players competing together at max. So the synergy between the players you need to play a bit more focus on as compared to talent. I would look for synergy between the team captain and the coach. The coach is sort of in there to put guiding principles on the kind of game you want to play. The captain is kind of responsible for deploying that when you're actually playing and building a culture around the team for that. So I look for synergy there. At the same time, you know, you also want some star power. You also want people that have a certain following on Instagram. You want people that are building, have a community of their own that they're going to bring to the team with you. Because as a team owner, one of the things you're looking for at the end of the day is also to constantly source money from different brands, from different people that want the attention that comes with your team. And one of the ways to do that is to bring in talent that already has that with them or has been working towards that for a while. So it's usually a mix of things, not too dissimilar from football, but one of the elements that makes a bigger difference in esports than football is the synergy between the players as well. Because a much smaller team, you're talking about 5, 6 players constantly living together, we're living with each other 24/7, and a lot of personalities need to align that way.
Right. And how does scouting work? Or is it just purely like ranking based? So if someone wins, they get more like experience, or they're paid better? Or do you have scouting where it's like, oh, diamond in the rough kind of thing?
A little bit of everything. Sometimes you will find diamonds in the rough. Keep your eyes and ears to the ground. You'll notice these up and coming players that have consistently performed well at certain tournaments. And if you feel like you should back them, then that's a route you can take.
So did
It's
you
also a lot of
physically go to these tournaments and find people?
sometimes
Okay.
you do. At times you do. At times you will keep an eye out for players that are up and coming in the scene. So what happens is as you grow up and up into a sport, the sort of players that compete at the highest level, they kind of all know each other or they have heard of each other. So if there's a player that's climbing the ranks, that is getting more and more popular, that let's say shows up to a tournament and performs really well, suddenly there will be a lot more eyes on that player. So keeping an eye and ear out for things like that helps. At the end of the day, like I said, because it's a small community, at the highest level, the top 1% of players, everyone knows everyone. So a lot of these teams will be built in consultation with each other. It's very likely that you're going to have a player on your team talk to this other player to join your team and say, hey, listen, we're building a squad out. We want you to be part of the next project. Do you want to sign with us? Um, and usually that's how an introduction will go. And at the highest level, I remember talking to you about this earlier as well. You'll have the talent managers, you'll have the agents, you'll have sometime at times you'll need to buy out a contract from another team if it's already in place,
Okay, so
which is
transfer
also a
fees
source of
basically.
revenue. Sorry?
So transfer fees basically.
Yeah. And I remember, man, the first time. So we were one of the first few who did this in India professionally. And I remember selling a player contract at the time for $5,000, somewhere around 5 lakh rupees. At the time, it might not seem like the biggest amount, right? But now we have contracts going into multiple millions for players. That said, $5,000 at the time for my team in India, you know, maybe wasn't the biggest top line source of revenue, but paid rent for the office, kept the lights on for a few more months. You know, it's not insignificant.
Yeah, I
And
can
this was in
imagine.
like 2017, 2018. Now, if you're talking about the highest level of Counter Strike or whatnot, those players are paid in the millions. So if I'm a team that's trying to buy out a player from a team that's already signed a contract, I will be looking at a multiple $100,000 buyout. Uh, And
Wow.
just like in football, the same is happening very much so from there's a lot happening in Saudi Arabia, right? You have these star players signing for these teams in Saudi Arabia. Sometimes Saudi Arabia will loan these players out, and to do that, they'll pay off the existing club a significant amount of money.
Right.
For the additional club, that's just revenue. That's just revenue, and that's not insignificant revenue.
That's insane. Like to just be exposed to this world, which is really running in parallel with traditional football. And from everything you've said, it's also quite mature. So, where does it go from here? Do you see this as a plateau, or do you see this as an industry which is still in its infancy?
I think it's past its infancy. I think to say it's in its infancy anymore would be doing it injustice. There was a time where it was booming. Uh, then came the esports winter, as people like to call it, where a lot of the investment that people could not recuperate for the reasons we spoke about before. The success rate sometimes can be low. A lot of the investors backed out and to move and moved on to new and shinier things like crypto and like some of these other Web3 games and some of these other avenues. That said, those that survived, those were able to hold strong through that esports winter because they ran their teams or their setups in a much more professional way. They made it to the other side. And now they're actually having a decent time. They're not having the worst time in that now there are more ways that you can monetize. Their communities have grown over time. You have leagues and systems in place where there is a certain amount of guaranteed revenue. So that gives you the safety net to keep your team running in a sustainable manner. I think it's an industry that's getting more mature over time. It isn't quite there yet at par with sports. There's still some work to do there. I think the biggest differentiator there is rights, is media rights. Till date, I think the biggest source of revenue for any sports team is media rights. It isn't quite the same with esports because esports traditionally viewership has always been free to watch. It's always been free to watch on YouTube, Twitch, and all these other vehicles. That said, it is becoming a bigger and bigger deal now. You have more and more brand revenue coming in for people who want to advertise via esports. If you look at the esports World Cup right now in Saudi Arabia, there's people like Adidas who does the official kits for the World Cup. There's the Sony InZone brand who does the headsets, the chairs, monitors. Could be completely wrong here, but there are more and more people who are using the esports vehicle or stream to sell their stuff, to sell their merchandise. As long as that keeps growing, as long as the communities keep growing, and that more and more attention keeps going towards esports and games, as long as people run their clubs in a sustainable manner, I think they're going to see a lot more profit in the near future, maybe in the long term as well. But again, I think with any other industry, they do run the risk of falling out of relevancy if they don't make all the right moves at the right time.
True.
But yeah, it's
True.
that's always a risk with trying anything experimental,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But do you foresee the way content or just branding is provided to esports evolve in the future? Because right now, it's selling maybe merchandise in a game or different revenue streams going by a football team's presence in esports. But the
Hmm.
way that happens with AR, VR, do you foresee that evolving?
Yeah, that has already been evolving, and I think that's been evolving in esports faster than sports. That's a very hot take, but I have seen that happen. Where in production live streams for esports titles, they were a mile ahead of all the production you'd see for cricket, football, even a step further, because of the amount of data that you can play with and the fact that it's a video game, you can pull data in real time, all the stats are there. You can turn these into much more powerful 3D, AR, VR graphics much faster. That was always the case, and I see more and more innovation happening there. The tournament organizers or the people that used to run the esports leagues, it was almost a way for them to compete with each other. Is that we'll do better production, we'll up the production, and then we'll monetize it against media rights for certain things. So I think the competition there pushed each other to a healthier level where they were all innovating quite heavily. I see that only moving more and more progressively towards more experimental things and more. At the end of the day, the net result is the consumer has a much more entertaining product to watch.
Yeah, the
So
viewing
I
experience is
see that
better.
evolving. Sorry.
The
Yeah,
viewing
the
experience
viewer
is much
experience
better.
is
Yeah.
yeah, that's the net result, and I see more and more happening in that direction. Because if you're someone who's, let's say, putting out an esports IP and you want the production to be of high quality because you want the viewer experience to be better, Because if you don't have their attention, it's going somewhere else. If you don't have their attention, it'll go back to Instagram, it'll go back to something else on YouTube, or it'll go back to some other game that they could watch. You want to keep them locked into watching your esports IP or your particular tournament or your particular team. And in order to do that, it needs to be a compelling product.
The first time I recognized this in real time was when I saw the Sidemen charity match. Because it's basically a bunch of YouTubers with their friends and stuff who had an incredible production crew and they sold out Wembley. And a bit of this is to do with how watchable and entertaining the content is, but also to do with how accessible the content is. They tried doing touchline interviews with players, stuff which I feel should slowly enter mainstream football as well, because that's one way to capture that core audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very important to look at esports to drive that innovation because, as you said, there is, world is your oyster there. You can improve the product infinitely. And you can't take all of that and translate it into traditional football, but I think you can take parts of it which genuinely improve the viewership and the viewing experience and translate it into football.
Yeah. Uh, and I would say that applies to any production period, whether it's sports, whether it's football, whether it's esports, whether it's Formula One, is blurring the sort of line between viewer and end product, making that as indivisible as possible is sort of core to the sport, right? Earlier, back in the day, we would listen to sport on the radio and get happy. Then television came. Now it's YouTube channels following teams 24/7. Some now it's even further. Now it's actually, literally the footballers themselves talking to their fans live on Instagram.
Having
So I
their own
think
brand. Yeah.
having their own brand and spending the time building that brand, it's almost like, in order to stay relevant and to provide a better viewer experience, you need to reduce the distance between the product you're trying to sell and the product you're trying to get people to watch and the viewers themselves. And the more ways you can do that, the more ways you can engage with the audience, the more ways you can make it an experience for them that they're a part of, not just watching from afar, the more you're going to be able to retain their attention and then find ways to monetize. I think that, yeah, there's a lot of parallels that all sports can borrow from each other, including esports.
Yeah, very true. And, so what I think is esports isn't really a fad. And going back to the tweet I shared earlier about Wolves, I think at its core, there's so many similarities in the raw emotion because when the team won, you can see celebration, you can see the competitiveness, you can see the feeling of being involved in that sport. And those emotions transcend football. So, yeah, it's really fascinating how esports is shaping football. And thank you so much, Nishant, for being on the podcast to share your side of the story.
I enjoyed this, man, and I'm sure I'll be back again. There's a lot more to talk about. So yeah, thanks for having me.